listening to the Motherhood Experience, a podcast where you are part of the conversation with moms, for moms, and by moms. Let's jump into this episode with me, your host, Val Kleppen. Hello and welcome back to the Motherhood Experience podcast. I'm your host, Val Kleppen. So glad that you joined us today. Today, my guest is another friend from my Fargo days and yet another friend that I met in the Women's Leadership Program. Her name is Danielle Teigen. She at one point was my editor while I was contributing in the Parenting Perspectives column for the Fargo Forum. And she has quite the experience of motherhood while working and changing career paths and moving from big town Fargo to small, tiny town, South Dakota. And I can't wait for you to hear her story. So join me now with my guest, Danielle Teigen. All right. I am joined by my friend Danielle. I am so thrilled that you agreed to join me. I hope that you are also thrilled or at least excited for the conversation.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful. So I prepped you a little bit just by saying that we start every episode with the ages and stages of your children and where you are in motherhood. So why don't you share with the listeners what that looks like for you today?
Sure. So my oldest, Dominic, he is 10 and he's in the fourth grade. And then my daughter, she is 6.5. She's in the first grade. And then our youngest is 3. His name is Kane and he will be 4 next month. So he likes to tell people he's almost 4, but he's still 3 technically.
That is such a sweet age. I feel like they are always so proud of what they're almost going to be.
Right.
I feel like that happens a lot. So Danielle, you and I became connected back in 2013, and I've had a guest on who was in my class of the 35 under 35 leadership program, and you went through the following year.
Yep.
And I do remember introducing one of the speakers at one of the sessions. I can't remember which session it was, 2 or 3 or something. But anyway, because of the alum and that association and everything, that's how you and I became connected.
Yep.
Later on, you actually were my editor when I was pumping out parenting perspective columns. So that was a fun reconnection there as well. But why don't you tell our audience what your career journey was like from the time or even before when you and I met to kind of what you're doing today?
Sure. Well, my career journey has always included storytelling and writing. I decided when I was in second grade that I was going to be an author. And so that's what I wanted to do. And that's actually what took me to Fargo, where we connected, is because I'm from South Dakota originally. And I decided I wanted to go somewhere different. And so I went to NDSU and studied journalism and management communication. I had a speech comm minor and I stayed in the Fargo area after I graduated, and I worked for a magazine, worked for the Chamber of Commerce for a little while. And then actually when I was in that leadership program, I worked for an engineering company, which was a very interesting experience doing communications and public relations and marketing for an engineering firm. But it was really exciting. It was a fun time to be doing that and going through the leadership program that we were in, just because I learned a lot about myself and my leadership style and kind of what I could do at that company, where it was people that I wasn't necessarily like. I'm not an engineer, I'm a communicator, obviously. And so that was a fun experience to be a part of. But actually I left Alteg while I was on maternity leave with my oldest. There was some stuff happening at the company that I just wasn't sure was going to be the place for me long term. And it turned out that that's when the Chamber of Commerce job came up. And so I went there for a while, but ended up ultimately landed at Forum Communications Company. And I'd interned for them in college. So I worked for them for a summer and stayed on as a part-time reporter for them. And then this position, it was a digital content producer position. So I was essentially blogging a lot of content, and then became the manager of that team. And then the features position came up, which is how then you and I connected, is because I wanted to be on the newspaper side. I wanted to work, in the newsroom, which we were actually still on the same floor. We were just in like a different section of the newsroom, but I wanted to be part of that. So I became the features editor. And then a few years after that, I became deputy editor of the newspaper. So I was working directly with our news team, working on that. And we were doing a lot of our kind of online digital initiatives at that time. And then back in 2020, actually, I we had a total life change. We had just welcomed our last baby. He was born December of 2019, and we had decided that we were going to move back to South Dakota so that my husband could actually take over my family's bank here in my small hometown in South Dakota. But I wanted to stay with my company. I wanted to stay with Forum Communications. So I was fortunate that they were fine with me doing that. So I'm still working for my company out of Fargo. I'm doing writing and editing. Essentially, I started out doing the managing of On the Minds of Moms magazine, which you are familiar with that. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that too. But that's what I do. I work part-time because we don't have full-time childcare for the youngest. But I'm still writing. I'm still editing. I still get to interview interesting people too for various stories. So it's all worked out.
Okay, there is so much in there that I want to unpack. I love that story. First of all, that's a really cool journey. I love how it started with the fact that you knew in the second grade
Mm-hmm.
and you named it and claimed it time to kind of thing that you were going to be a writer. I think that my oldest would love to sit and have a chat with you as well.
Nice.
But I want to say, like, is it super comfortable for you being on the other side of interviewing right now?
It is. I think just because I am so used to interviewing, the only thing I guess is that I'm not in control of the questions that you ask, but I'm not worried. I trust whatever you're going to ask, and I don't have anything I won't be willing to talk about, especially when it comes to motherhood, because we all know there's a lot there that you can't really anticipate, but it's good experience to share.
Right. I love also how your career journey put you really on the front lines of motherhood, getting insight from other moms. You talked about the On the Minds of Moms
Mhm.
magazine, which I don't remember when that like first came to be, and then the forum kind of acquired it, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, but it was in circulation for like a few years, and Michelle and I um were on we were featured moms of one of them. I
Right.
can't remember when it was,
I think
2014 or
I
15.
think you were in it in 2016 because
Oh, that
actually
could be.
the magazine was started by two moms from the West Fargo area in 2008. They started that magazine
No
in
kidding.
2008. I know. It's wild that we've technically had On the Minds of Moms, publishing content for 15 years. This is the 15th year that
Oh,
there has
that's
been On the Minds of
fascinating.
Moms content. Yeah, which is wild. And so then Forum Communications acquired it from those two founding mothers back in the fall of 2019. So right when I was about to go on maternity leave, we were talking about, because I had magazine editing experience and I'd already managed
Right.
magazines. And so my bosses were saying, is that something you'd want to do when you come back from maternity leave? And I said, yeah, I'd be interested in doing that. I don't know what it's going to look like. And then the pandemic obviously kind of threw everything into a tailspin, but we got it worked out. So yeah, but you guys were featured. I want to say it was that summer of 2016, I think it was.
I think that's probably right. If
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Um and it's just funny also how you and I have these touch points at different stages of our own motherhood journey and career journeys as well, but it seems like each year and each touch point was something different. But I want to talk about when you and your husband got together. Did you know or expect that you wanted to be a mom?
Yeah, I've always assumed I was gonna be a mom. That was part of what I saw for my life is just that, well, you go to college, you decide on a career, you get a job, you start working, you meet someone, and you start a family, and that's where your journey goes. And so, yeah, it was always part of what I wanted for my life, what I saw for my life. There was a time, I will say, before my oldest was born, before we ever even thought about trying to have any kids, that my mom, who was a stay-at-home mom, she never wanted to have a job and a career, and she fully, lived that out, and she embraced that and talked to us about that and has talked to us about it a lot more. But I remember her saying to me, and she remembers it too because we've talked about it, where she made a comment. This would have been 2011, I think, and she made a comment about, well, the reason I wanted to stay at home with my kids and not have a job is because I didn't want someone else to raise them for me. And I said,
Mm,
do you see why, mom, maybe I don't necessarily think I should have kids, or if I don't want to give up my career to be with my kids, then maybe that's a reason to not have the kids, because I don't want someone else to feel like they're raising my kids when I should be raising my kids. And she was like, no, 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 that's not what I mean. And I said, no, it's fine. That is a valid point, because I have thought that same thing. And, so we talked a lot about that when we decided we were going to start a family. As we talked about, well, what does that look like for both of us? Because neither of us were at a point where we wanted to, um, pull back on our careers, or step
Mhm.
back in any way, or give it up entirely. And so then it was a real conversation of like, well, what does a two-person working family look like, and what does that mean for each of us, and what we're going to be responsible for or expected to do, and things like that. So we definitely had some pretty honest conversations about what our family life would look like and what we wanted it to look like.
Yeah. And so relatable on so many levels. I mean, you're definitely not alone in that. Did you anticipate that you wanted maybe one kid or a large family or something in between, or you were just going to wait and see what happened, or how is that determined?
Sure. So Kevin, my husband, he is one of three, and I am one of three. And so when I thought that I would have kids, I said, well, I'm going to have four kids, because I was a person in a three-person family, and someone always gets left out with three kids. Someone is always getting left out. So you have to have an even number. And then I had one kid, and I realized, no, I definitely cannot handle having four kids. That's not even possible. I wasn't even sure. We weren't even sure after we had two kids. We were like, this is a whole lot of work. We had a boy and a girl. We kind of felt like, oh, okay, we're set. We're good. Let's not push it, and then
Sure.
we struggled actually quite a bit between our first and our second. We had some infertility issues anyway. So once our daughter was born, we said, oh, I really, I mean, this is a lot of work. We got a boy and a girl, and we had issues. Maybe we really shouldn't push it. So, but then we pushed it, and now we have Kane, and he's boy, he's something else. he's he's something else. He's fun. He's a lot.
And so each of your children, do they have a very different personality
Oh
from
yes.
one another?
Oh yeah.
Especially with I suppose because the one in the middle is your girl, right?
Mhm.
And
Yep.
so probably very distinct from her oldest and youngest sibling.
Yes. Well, and it's interesting too, because I always wanted girls. I grew up in an all girl family. I have only two sisters. My mom had four sisters. And so I was always around lots of women. And so when I assumed that I would have kids, I just assumed I would have girls, or I wanted girls. And then we found out we were having a boy the first time. And I thought, oh, I don't know what to do. How am I going to play trucks and dinosaurs and things like that? And then we had him, and it was a lot of fun, learning those things and learning how boys are just so very, very different. And so then when we were having our second one, and we found out that it was going to be a girl, I actually felt a little bit disappointed, because I thought, well, now he's not going to have a brother. Like, if we don't have more kids, now he's not going to have a brother, but I really wanted a girl. So there's this, like, all these conflicting emotions. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's been really interesting too to watch, with the oldest being a boy, and then the next one being a girl, and then she has a younger brother. It's been interesting to watch. She's very much um, a nurturer, and she likes making sure everything is okay. But she's also, I think, a typical middle child too, where she doesn't like to let anybody get away with anything. So she's the one who kind of tells on her brothers, either one, when they're doing something they shouldn't do. And then
Yeah.
Kane, yeah, Dominic is a typical older child, where he wants to be involved in everything, and he wants to be responsible, and he wants to be grown up, and he's ready to, when's he getting a phone? When can he learn how to drive? I'm like, you're 10. What? And then yeah, Kane is just, we joke about his name, that we maybe should have called him Hurricane, because he's a bit of a force to be reckoned with, in all sorts of ways. And so it's been very interesting to see how very different their personalities are. I mean, there's some similarities obviously too, but yes, they're very distinctly their own person.
Oh, yes. And I love hearing stories about different kids and kind of where they fall personality wise in their family line. I wanted to talk too about when your book came out and what the writing process was like having did you only have Dominic when the book came
So
out?
when the first book came out, that came out actually in 2017, which was the same year that my daughter was born. And then the second book came out in 2020, which was the year after Kane was born.
Okay.
So I birthed babies and books apparently in the same, like, 12 month month process. It's just, yeah, it's kind of wild.
Both are grueling and exhausting processes, but tell me about writing the first book. What made you wanna do it, and what was that like balancing writing time
Oh man.
with having being pregnant and also having this really young boy?
Yes. I have wanted to write a book since I decided in second grade I was going to be an author. I mean, if you're going to be an author, you have to write a book, right? And my book came up a little bit unconventionally in that a publisher approached me about writing it, which is not how most books go, but because it's a specialty niche nonfiction local history type, it's a little different. But they approached me, and yeah, at the time we just had Dominic, and I thought, yeah, I could probably do this. I mean, sure, people write books all the time, right? Like, how hard can it be? So I signed the contract and had to do all the research and then the writing. And I went, wow, this is a lot to take on. And I imagined in my head when I, started this process of writing a book, I thought it was going to be, I only have the one kid. So Kevin will stay at home with Dominic and like on a weekend for like a Saturday, and I'll go sit at like Starbucks and just write all day. And I'll have these like wonderful chunks of time to write my book, and it'll just get done in this like wonderfully organized, process. No, that's 100% not at all what happened. I mean, it was a lot like motherhood, where it was like, just survive, just get something done. Just, it doesn't have to be great, but just put something on paper because you can come back to it later. I mean, I spent a lot of my lunch hours, writing. I would just sneak away from the office downtown and just try to go to like the nearest coffee shop, write for 45 minutes, and then, swallow some food and get back to my desk. And then honestly, at night after Dominic went to bed, between 7:30, 8 o'clock, I sat at my computer and just typed and researched and wrote and I just tried to get as much as I could done between basically 8 p.m. and 11 p.m. And then I would go to bed and I would, start it all over the next day trying to get something done. And it was a process for sure. It was a lot of work. And I thought, honestly, the second time around, then when the second book, because I actually pitched the second book to my editor, and they said, yep, they accepted it, signed the contract, and started working on that one. And I thought, well, I've been through this. I know what I'm doing. But I was pregnant at the time. I was trying to finish up the research and the writing as my due date was approaching. And I remember actually, it was a lot of the same, like frantic, just get some writing done in these short, crazy bursts of time whenever I could. It was not a pretty process, but it got done. And I remember actually, I sent off the manuscript for the second book, and it was due at the end of February, I think, and I was due in April. And I thought, okay, now what? Like, I hadn't heard anything for a couple of weeks. So then I reached out to them and they said, oh yeah, we're going to do some copy editing and then we'll send you stuff. The night before, so I ended up having a C-section with my daughter because she was breech. She flipped at the last like 30, I was like 37 weeks and some days. And my doctor checked me and was like, she's breech. Like, her head is not where it's supposed to be. It was like, okay. So I'm supposed to have a C-section on a Wednesday morning, and that Tuesday night at 10:30, I remember sitting there sending final edits to the copy editor and was like, hey, these are the changes we need to make. And also, I'm going in for a C-section tomorrow morning, so I might be unavailable for a few days. But if you need to get a hold of me, here's my cell phone, or here's my husband's number. And they were like, go have your baby. Good luck and congratulations. We will talk to you in like a couple weeks. I was like, no, really, I'm fine. I'll probably be okay. Like, in a day or two, I'll be home. So that was the first book. Yeah. And then with the second book, I actually finished that while I was on maternity leave with Kane. And literally my mom came to hang out with me while I was on maternity leave so she could hold Kane while I was writing. And at the very, very end, right before it was due, I literally, this same laptop, I had it balancing on my forearms with him right next to it, and I'm typing, and it was wild, but I got it all done. I made my deadlines, and there were books that got published because I made those deadlines. But
Okay,
yeah,
was
it was wild.
was Dominic a cesarean also, or
Nope.
was she your first? She was your first cesarean, and
Yep.
you said you might not be available.
Yeah. Oh, okay, right? Like, I'll be fine. I'd never been through a C-section before, and then I learned what the recovery is from a C-section, which is not good. Yeah. So,
Oh my goodness,
yeah,
that's
it was an
very
experience.
entertaining. Very entertaining. Well, I'm glad you recovered from all of that because, oh my goodness.
I did. Whew. I mean, just
And
barely.
none of it soured you on writing, and the writing didn't sour you on motherhood, so it all
Yeah.
worked out beautifully.
Right. I
Oh
mean,
my
I think
goodness.
so.
So do you have a preference for writing like nonfiction? I mean, the first one was history. Do I know about the second one? I don't know if I
Well,
know of
they're
it.
both about Fargo. So the first one was the
Okay.
hidden history of Fargo, and then the second book that came out was the Fargo Fire of 1893. So they're both
Oh,
super
yes.
nerdy history, nonfiction. Like they are full of facts and dates and stuff like that. I would say I love all kinds of writing. I'm most comfortable in nonfiction just because that's where I've spent, my career is interviewing people, getting facts, verifying facts, corroborating information, and then putting that in a format that people want to read. And so my next big goal would be to write a novel of some sort. My goal would be to write a historical fiction novel because that's what I like to read. But I'm kind of scared for the idea of coming up with a story myself and having to
Mm,
make stuff up, to make a good story.
mm.
So that would certainly push my comfort level.
I think it was, I can't remember now when it started. I think it was maybe the tail end of 2019 when, and I've been blogging, telling first person accounts of my life since 2008. So that's also interesting that On the Minds of Mom started in that same year. But at the end of 2019, I think that it was, but the story just kept cycling through my head. And I thought, I got to get this out of my head. And I started typing, and it was a fictional story. And then when 2020 happened, and so basically, the end of 2019, the story was about like the end of the world. Okay. And I don't think I've really explained this to anyone. So here we go, Danielle.
I'm
It
excited.
was it was like the end of the world where the government had imploded and was at war with itself. And the whole country had fallen apart. And there was this rural family that was just like surviving off the land. They had all moved in together. And the sister, the sister who was the main character, but she protected her sister by shooting this guy in the head when he tried to kidnap her off the property, like super intense stuff.
Yeah.
And it was like all about where to find these resources, and the creature comforts that they'd become used to weren't available anywhere. And then 2020 happened and things started to go awry, and I was like, hey, we're gonna close this laptop.
But do you feel like you might have been predicting the future a little bit?
I don't know. It was the weirdest thing because even my husband was like, you don't even read fiction. How are you writing fiction? And I was like, I don't know. It's just been circulating in my head. I felt like I had to get it out. And I think I got like 8 chapters in or something.
That's
And
awesome.
I know, but also like weird. And seriously, when like the whole country starts shutting down, I was like, nope,
Right.
I
Well,
am
and
not
then, yeah.
making another chapter in this. Like my hands are clean, y'all.
Yeah, especially the idea of like the scarcity of resources and everything that happened during the pandemic. I mean, you might be a little bit clairvoyant there.
It was weird. I keep thinking I forget about it, honestly, but when I remember, I'm like, I should go back and read that again and like see if I could finish it first of all. But it was just so close to home, I think,
Right.
for things falling apart right then that I couldn't hack it.
Yeah,
But anyway, I
that's
don't know how
that's
did we get
awesome though.
started talking about me? I don't remember.
Well, and it's one of those things that once you get a little bit removed from it, you could probably feel a little bit better about revisiting some of that or kind of trying to put yourself back into that mindset
Right.
because things, that are difficult obviously to experience can be hard to revisit until you're ready for it.
Indeed. Indeed. So I think it's funny also that we met in Fargo, but now both of us live in South Dakota, but we don't live anywhere near each other.
No.
Like we're several hours apart. But what was small town life like for you growing up, and was that something that you wanted your kids to experience also? Is that what prompted the move?
Yes. Growing up in this tiny town, I mean, this is a town of 50 people. I mean, it's tiny.
Oh,
Yeah, so it's tiny. But I really loved it. It was just very everything felt safe and everything felt just like a big adventure and I never I liked knowing who everybody in town was. If we, were riding
Mm.
our bikes around town, we knew who was meeting us on the road in a pickup or, walking their dog or whatever it was. And so, and my husband he is from a smallish town. It's more than 50 people, but it's in north central North Dakota. But he grew up on a farm. And so he was also of the mindset that, it's okay to live in a smaller community. And so actually when we were getting married, we looked at homes in smaller communities around the Fargo area. Some of those, like
Mm.
we looked in Horace, we looked at houses in Horace. We talked about Hillsboro, maybe even Kindred, some of those smaller communities, Castleton. And we talked
Right.
about, having our kids be in a smaller school system, being in a smaller community and things like that. And for whatever reason, it just didn't end up working out there. But then when the opportunity came up for us to move back here, mainly because my dad wants to retire at some point, but there was no one else to take over the business. And my husband had that kind of experience in his career. And so we talked about, is this our opportunity? Is this the small town opportunity that we wanted for our kids? And we said, I think it might be. So here we are. So we decided to make the move, and it turned out we moved in the middle of a pandemic, which I would not recommend. It's not fun at all.
That club that you and I are both in, that club, it's a big club. There were so many people who moved
Why?
that
Why
year.
were we moving during the pandemic though? It's just that like we didn't have enough stuff going on. I mean, I honestly, not that PTSD is something to joke about, but I really do think I have some PTSD from 2020 because just even like what you were talking about, like having to remove yourself from what you've written. There are
Yeah.
shows that we have watched that when they get to the point of like having been filmed in 2020, where they've all got their face masks on, or they're talking about, they're wearing the suits and stuff. And I've had this like, I'll have this anxiety about, oh my gosh, I remember that. I don't want to watch that. I lived through that. I don't want to watch
Mm.
it. And so it's a weird thing to have gone through that. And we've obviously come out on the other side, relatively, we have unscathed, but there's
Yeah.
still, there's some residual anxiety about what that time in our life was like.
Do you think part of it comes because Fargo is a considerably larger area to especially where you and I both are right now.
Right.
I remember pulling into the Costco parking lot at some point. I mean, I hadn't left the house and who knows how long, because shelter in place order in small town Minnesota and all of this. But like Brent had been doing all of the errand running and stuff because he was the one still going into town or whatever. But I remember pulling into the Costco parking lot and seeing everyone walking around inside and outside with masks on. And I just sat in the car and cried. I was like, this is not
Right.
normal. I don't want this to be life. This is terrible.
Yeah. And for me at that time too, it was, that was scary, but it was also really scary for me to think about my kids. Cause at the time where we were living in Fargo, my kids were playing with our next door neighbors, and all of a sudden we were going, you shouldn't play with them. Like, those are your friends. We know that they are good people, but all of a sudden it became, people living right next door to us felt unsafe because, they were saying, shelter in place, don't go out, don't spread things, and that was a really scary feeling, just to know that we were somehow possibly unsafe from the people we had always felt safe around, and like,
Right.
and not
Or
being
to not
your family and stuff.
to not know, or to just to question safety
Yeah.
in general. Or for me, I just remember distinctly seeing, like, I did not want to even fathom or comprehend that the new normal would have to be that everyone would live like this
Right.
that day forward.
Oh.
It was heartbreaking for me.
Right. Or to contemplate when you'd be able to be in a room with people again and feel safe,
Yeah.
Can I be around my family who at the time was living in South Dakota and one was living in Minnesota and I was in North Dakota? Like, when is it going to be safe for all of us to be together, and that's a very strange feeling to have when you just,
And
the anxiety of the unknown was just so high.
And still, I think there's so much validity to what you said about maybe it is a PTSD thing, but there's still so much residual anxiety about maybe not trusting something or someone or a situation, even I remember the birthday parties over Zoom, like kid birthday parties, and it was just always so heartbreaking.
Right.
So heartbreaking. But anyway,
right.
Enough about that. Moving on.
Right. Let's talk about something more fun, like motherhood.
Right.
No.
Yes, yes. So did your kids adjust well? Did they really enjoy life when you moved to this super tiny town from the
Um,
hustle and bustle?
the two youngest were so young when we moved that, Kane was 6 months old when we moved. So he doesn't know any
Mm,
different. He doesn't remember anything
mhm,
different. And right away, she had just turned 3 that April and we moved in June. And she had a bit of a hard time adjusting, only that she was still in that really unsure, shy toddler phase. And so when we, would go into the bank where, grandpa and dad were working there, and all the people who knew her because we'd been coming back obviously to visit and stuff, she was still pretty hesitant about, opening up and getting to know them. It was hardest for my oldest, for Dominic, because he was in kindergarten. He finished out kindergarten his COVID year, which last day of school over Zoom is also not fun. So that was not something I would recommend for anybody. But yeah, he was sad to leave his friends and,
mhm.
not be able to see, especially those next door neighbors that we had. We were very lucky in the neighborhood where we lived in Fargo, where we loved the families who were right next to us and we got along with them. So it was hard for him to leave them, especially because we talked a lot about, like, I talked about a lot with Kevin about just like the autonomy that he lacked, in that we were leaving our friends, but we can plan a trip with our friends, we can go see our friends. He doesn't have that. He just doesn't
Yeah.
have that ability. And we tried to go back, every now and then when it was safe to travel again and to be around anybody. We tried to make arrangements with some of those other families so he could see his friends. And I think that did help soften the blow a little bit, missing those friends. But he's a pretty outgoing kid. And so what we found out right away after we moved, that baseball was going to be starting. They had delayed the season because of COVID, but they were going to try to have like a couple weeks of baseball. And someone told us, hey, bring him to baseball. And so I think that helped a little bit too, because he met a lot of the kids then who he'd be going to school with once they started school, which that was, an interesting experience that first fall, where it was like, it was new and it was fun, but it was also still kind of weird because there were still some COVID
Mm,
restrictions with like where they sat on the bus, and they had to have masks on the bus, but they didn't have to wear them in the classrooms. And like, that was weird. And I remember actually, so the small town where they go to school, which is 11 miles away, they had actually just finished building a brand new school the summer that we moved back here. And Dominic wasn't able to come to the back to school night with us, and he was having some anxiety after that, before the first day of school, saying, but mom, I'm not going to know my way around the school, and he's thinking the West Fargo school where it was like,
yes.
here are the 6 different kindergarten classrooms, and here's the gigantic library, and here's all the other classrooms and stuff. And we had to say to him, well, honey, no one has been in this school. Like, this school is just opening now, so you're actually going to be learning where everything is with all the other kids too. But also, I said, it's a small school, so it's high school goes down one hallway, like junior high and high school goes down one hallway, and everyone will be through the lunchroom area where you'll all be together, if you need to be, and then you'll go down one other hallway for like the elementary wing. So I was like, it's really not too hard, honey. I think you'll figure it out. There's like one direction you can go this way, one direction you can go that way. And I think that
Oh,
helped at least, calm some anxieties he had about, the physical layout of the building and stuff. But
right.
yeah, he adjusted pretty quickly. And yeah, Catherine, even once she got over that shyness, she yeah, opened up and she started getting used to things. She went to preschool that fall, so that helped too, that, she was
Yeah.
meeting more kids and having fun and doing that kind of stuff. So yeah.
So being involved in the lives of so many moms with your work in the On the Minds of Moms, magazine and
Mhm.
articles and all of that, are there things that you have observed or heard or just picked up on over the years in your involvement where you're like, I think I might try that actually.
Right.
That was a really great idea.
There have certainly been lots of useful, helpful pieces of information, even if someone wasn't necessarily offering it. I will say, with the first one that came to mind was I interviewed a pediatric gastroenterology therapist, who deals with kids and their digestive systems. And I interviewed her for an article about basically like, kids have constipation issues and how do you potty train kids and stuff. And it was an article for the magazine, but it was the most fascinating hour and 15 minutes of my life that I've ever spent talking about pooping and peeing. And I learned so much from her. And she was just so wonderful to just explain things in this way that I was like, why has no one explained that to these kids about, like, this is why you should sit like this? And, you know, it's just really interesting. And it was so interesting, in fact, that I paid for the course that she put together about how to potty train a kid. And that's what I used to potty train our last one, because I hadn't actually potty trained our oldest. They kind of potty trained themselves at daycare because all the other kids were doing it. Well, Kane wasn't at
Oh,
daycare.
wow.
And so I went, oh, I'm going to have to do this. I don't know how to do this. So luckily I found Kiara's course and bought that and was like, she knows what she's talking about. I'm going to do it that way. So that's what we did.
Oh my goodness. I didn't even think of that, but to have those professional insights and those nuggets into the world of the experts who live in them would be something as well. Like it's not just, you know, the magazine itself is not just little nuggets of motherhood journeys or experience, but it's like, hey, like, I'm a
some practical information too, you know? Yeah. I mean, I didn't know I would love talking about, you know, that. I mean, as a parent, you talk about that stuff all the time, but it was for my job. And I was like, this is so fascinating. I said to her, I could talk to you all day. I feel like I would learn so much about like something I never thought I would want to know more about.
Well, and parenting, in fact, it's so funny because the episode that aired right before this one was with my chiropractor, who talked about getting regularly adjusted, and regular adjustments made her regular. And I was like, isn't this so fitting that we're talking about bowel movements as mothers, because it becomes such a huge part of your life.
Yep. Didn't know that. No one tells you that in the baby books. Like, prepare to talk about poop for the rest of your life. Even now that my kids aren't babies, the first time, literally every time they come to me and they're like, my stomach hurts. And the first thing I ask them, have you pooped today? No one asked me that when I was a kid. I don't remember anybody asking me that when I was a kid, but that's always my first question. Yep.
Yeah. And it usually fixes so much if
really
they just would go and do that. It's also funny too when other people's kids come and talk to you about their poop issues. That's That's a lot of fun as a mom too.
Or when other parents are like, "Oh, I'm sorry," you know, if their kid comes running in because they got a poop or they got a dirty diaper, and the parents are like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry." I'm a mom. You think I haven't been there, done that? No, it's fine. Don't even worry about it.
Don't you make that kid hold it in. You send them to my bathroom.
Right.
That's fine. You just turn the fan on.
Oh my gosh, yeah, for sure.
Oh, well, I have so enjoyed our conversation, and I feel like we're ending it on a weird note.
I mean, but that also is, I think, true to what motherhood is, because it's a lot of unexpected weirdness, isn't it?
Oh my goodness. Well, hey, I hope that you will keep me informed of the next book that comes out.
I will.
Maybe it'll be a little parenting ditty in there. Who knows?
Yeah.
I'll have to, if I can find what I wrote in 2019, maybe I'll have to send it your way if I can get through it myself too. But it's been such a blast talking to you, Danielle. Maybe you can come back and we'll talk about the rest of motherhood someday.
I would be happy to. Thanks so much for inviting me on, Val. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of the Motherhood Experience podcast. To join our exclusive TME community, head on over to themotherhoodexperience.com/learn more. Be sure to follow the Motherhood Experience on Facebook and Instagram, and please leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, leave us a comment below, and we'll catch you next time.